Welcome to the CEC Report for July the 11th. I'm Elisa Barwick, and with me, returned from San Francisco, is Robert Barwick.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Today we have three items to discuss. Firstly, deposit stealer put in charge of Rudd's office. Experts warn of global economic blow-up within weeks. And what has 5 eyes and 1 head? The British Crown. Now firstly, deposit stealer put in charge of Rudd's office. Now, for those of you who watch this program regularly, you'll know that we've been harping on about the drive to enact laws and legislation required to conduct a Cyprus-style bail-in at the point of a major banking crisis in this country, which we're heading for in the immediate period ahead. Now, Prime Minister Rudd, in his previous incarnation in 2009, signed Australia up to a new proposal which was put forward at that time by the newly established Financial Stability Board. This occurred at the 2009 G20 summit in London. And that Financial Stability Board program dictated that financial stability was the most important thing, and that every individual nation had to put sovereignty aside precisely to protect that financial stability. Now, of course, since you left the country, in fact, while you were on the plane,
Rudd came back.
We got a new Prime Minister, and now he's back, the original instigator of this bail-in approach, which we have confirmation in writing from the Financial Stability Board and other sources that such legislation is in train, it's in progress in Australia. So now Rudd, is he back here to finish the job? Robert?
Well, if you look at what he's just done, it's significant that his first major appointment, his choice of Chief of Staff, is a senior Treasury official named Jim Murphy. And Jim Murphy is a very unique Treasury official because he's one of the Australian members of the very same Financial Stability Board. Now, this is a rather exclusive, secretive organisation, the Financial Stability Board. We've been doing so much investigation lately to try and track down what this legislation is that this board said is being prepared in Australia, that included making calls to them in Switzerland, and lo and behold, you can't make calls to them. You can only access the Financial Stability Board through the Bank for International Settlement switchboard, and they're not going to put you through. So to be a member of this Financial Stability Board is a very key post. Well, it's that guy, Jim Murphy, that Rudd has appointed as his Chief of Staff.
And he's a Treasury Department official?
Yeah, he's a senior guy in the Treasury here. Right now, there are people on the Financial Stability Board from Australia, from Treasury, from APRA, which is the banking regulator, and from the Reserve Bank. So the key organisations that sort of oversee our financial system in Australia. So one of those guys is now in charge of Rudd's office. And this appointment is very timely because we've, just to recap the chronology, Elisa, 15th of April, in its own report, the Financial Stability Board said legislation is in train in Australia. And that was a report back to the G20, the organisation Rudd signed us up to in 2009. So we've said, okay, what is this legislation? Where is it? We've now been able to identify that it's in its drafting stage. So we had, in the last sitting of Parliament, which ended with Rudd deposing Gillard, we had a huge number of calls going into all the MPs we could find to say, this legislation is being prepared for Australia, what do you know about it? And all the MPs said the same thing, nothing. They were ignorant as sin. And they were all contacting their seniors in their parties, people such as Joe Hockey in the Liberal side or Wayne Swan on the Labor side. What is this legislation? And it's good they did that because it showed that, they were getting spooked. Not very many of them are going to want to consciously vote for something that they see in Cyprus has been so deadly, right? Oh, and by the way, Elisa, just while we're on the subject, it's very important to clarify one issue for the viewers. The legislation we're talking about, which will give them the power to steal deposits, is not the same thing that was just passed a couple of weeks ago, where deposits in inactive accounts can be confiscated. It's not that at all. We're not talking about inactive accounts. We're talking about all accounts.
Everything.
In Cyprus, this is when a bank starts to fail. Instead of the normal procedure where there's a a receivership period, so that like any institution, any corporation, etc., where its assets are sorted out, sold off, and the liabilities are met based on the ranking of those liabilities, who gets their money back first. This process is you keep the bank going, and you grab the customer's deposits or the percentage of them that you need to keep the bank going, so that financial stability is preserved. It's a completely different process.
And it's couched in terms of, well, we can't have bailout any longer because the banks engage in moral hazard if there's a bailout on tap from the government. So therefore, if we make them have to, forfeit the deposits of their depositors, that's going to make them more honest. They won't engage in such risky trading and so forth because they're going to be answerable to their depositors.
That's right. People have to understand that they're using real sophistry here to sell this. And you've got to get onto your Member of Parliament and put the wind up them, because they will fall for those lies. This is couched in free market jargon and lingo that these elected MPs have usually all been brainwashed in at university level. And they're saying this is for everyone's own good. Well, go to Cyprus and look. It's not for everyone's own good. It's fascism. It's brutal austerity that will impoverish the masses of people who lose their money in order to preserve this financial stability. And what are they preserving? They're preserving the global derivatives bubble. And we've said that here a number of times. It's in black and white. Look up on our website. But there's $1,400 trillion in global derivatives obligations. Australia's banks now have
21.5 trillion.
Okay, I think that's as of
that's
March, right? As of the March figure, 21.5 trillion. In September 2008, that was 13 trillion. So they've gone up, $8 trillion in a little bit over 4 years.
Although
right?
How much is that counting of the Commonwealth derivatives too, because they refuse to publish their
Exactly. The Commonwealth is keeping their figures under wrap. These are gambling debts. These are toxic bets that have brought down, they were brought down Lehman Brothers, etc., right? But instead of cancelling them, writing them off like they should do, they're going to preserve them first. That's what they mean by financial stability, and it's the people they're going to kill in order to do it by impoverishing them. So anyway, that's what we've been blowing the whistle on. That's the legislation that's being planned for Australia, and lo and behold, Rudd's first act is to appoint the guy from that organisation that's dictating this globally, the Financial Stability Board, to run his office. He is obviously there, Elisa, to direct this legislation through Parliament, right? Well, we know this, the viewers know this, we're going to make a big stink about it, and we have to stop it, and everyone who's watching this has to join our mobilisation to stop it, because we can. Let me make this point. I've just come back from the States. In America, this legislation was put through in 2010, but it was put through in a bill that was 800 pages long. All the congressmen who voted for this bill, called the Dodd-Frank Act, they had no idea what they were voting for. None. And we've since gone to them in recent times and said, this is what you voted for, and they are ropeable. They're threatened to sack their staff for not,
reading it thoroughly
enough for them, right? That's the only way this kind of law can normally get put through. People like Swanee and Joe Hockey and Chris Bowen might be in on it, but the average MP is not. The fact that we can make such a big stink about this means we can stop it, but everybody watching has to get involved.
Go to our bail-in page. You can download the flyers and all the information that we've referenced. Now, after the break, we're going to talk about the solution to this Glass-Steagall in the context of the further crash that is on its way. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Now we're going to discuss experts warn of global economic blow-up within weeks. Now, our international organisation has just had numerous discussions with various economic experts across Europe, Asia and the United States, and they are all in completely unified agreement that we're headed for another major financial blowout in the coming weeks, centred in the transatlantic region, but obviously spreading globally very rapidly. One of those contacts from London said we're actually in the extreme danger zone now.
One of the triggers of this, Elisa, is just the discussion about the ending of quantitative easing, which, for 4 years, the number one response to the global financial crisis has been this, absolutely historic money printing by the US Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, and now the Bank of Japan, right? And the Federal Reserve, which has done the lion's share of it, Ben Bernanke has just started making noises, we can't keep this up, and perhaps next year we'll stop it, right? And that has become a trigger for all kinds of instability in the way the system's structured now. That's only a trigger because, of course, the instability was always there. Nothing was done to solve the heart of the financial crisis, which is, we keep harping on about, $1.4 quadrillion in toxic derivatives bets. That's what's hanging over the world's head, right? And this money printing is all it's been servicing those the obligations, right? So this is what all the key experts are saying. The eruptions we've had in the recent period, this is brewing to something that could blow up within weeks.
And obviously there was an attempt to backpedal somewhat from that backing off on the quantitative easing, because just in the last week there were coordinated press conferences between the Bank of England and the European Central Bank, basically saying, no, we're going to keep printing, we're going to keep printing. So they're very, very nervous.
And then, of course, the markets go, oh, what? You're saying we can't handle it without it. And then they crash all over again.
But in reality, the policy, as we were talking about in the previous segment, that is being prepared is the massive austerity, the looting, as the Bank of International Settlements, JP Morgan, have been driving at, that there's a real fascist element that's required actually in order to make that work, to essentially keep the financial system going at the expense of the ordinary citizen, because the financial system is more important than human beings. Now, there's another call that has come out just in the last week to add to those others, and that's from the highly influential Boston Consulting Group, which is the second largest management consultancy group in the world. They put out a game plan for dealing with this financial crisis by basically wiping out massive chunks of financial assets of the people at a single stroke. Haircuts across the board. But what was interesting is that they said, unfortunately, reaching a consensus on this, on such tough action, might require an environment last seen in the 1930s. So this is pretty stunning. Now, in the last week also, in fact...
Well, in case people missed that, what they're saying is the very fascist police states that in Italy, Germany, Spain, etc., that the bankers backed then to enforce the austerity that they demanded then to prop themselves up then. That's what the Boston Consulting Group's alluding to.
And the earlier JP Morgan report that we referenced actually said, look, we're only halfway there in getting this austerity through in Europe, countries like Greece, etc., because we have the problem that after the fascism of the 30s and 40s, there were constitutions put up to protect the people.
And now they're getting in the way.
Exactly, but the European finance ministers met on the 26th of June, and they did agree to go with this bail-in approach. So that was passed by them. It now has to be negotiated by the European Parliament, which there are numbers of members of that European Parliament, particularly from Italy. In fact, Italy has just tabled legislation with enormous support in the Senate for the 4th time, so that is being discussed. Now, in the United States, there was also a discussion about Glass-Steagall within the context of hearings on June the 26th of the Financial Services Committee. And this was rather interesting because the fellow who led the questioning of 4 key witnesses, who were mainly federal regulators, was Michael Capuano. He's a Democratic representative who is a key sponsor of Glass-Steagall and the push for Glass-Steagall in the US Congress. He asked each of the 4 witnesses, if you could restore the Glass-Steagall Act now as the solution, would you do it if you had the power? Now, the witnesses answered this way. The Federal Deposit Insurance Commission Vice Chairman Thomas Honig said, absolutely, that's what I am proposing you do. The former FDIC chairman, Sheila Blair, said, yes, absolutely. The Dallas Federal Reserve president, Richard Fisher, said, I think what we have proposed is similar. And the only slightly negative response was Richmond Federal Reserve President Jeffrey Lacker, who said, well, look, I think the Dodd-Frank Act is going to cover the needed separation. So he wasn't, dismissing Glass-Steagall, but he wasn't as favourable.
He's just falling for the standard line by the Obama White House, which is just shows his own ignorance. It's not true. That act doesn't cover that at all.
So there is, an extraordinary motion for Glass-Steagall, and of course you've just returned from the United States.
Well, they're having a 2-week sitting of Congress beginning this coming week, and this Glass-Steagall issue is going to be the centre of the fight. And to prove it'll be the centre of the fight, you probably won't see anything in the media about it. But the number of congressmen that are starting to say, well, okay, you guys were right, and they're also listening to these warnings that we could be within something, another eruption in the next few weeks, right? And what they know is that if they don't go with Glass-Steagall, then you're going to have the same criminals on Wall Street who Obama has protected up until now will get away with dictating the response again. These are the guys that were too big to jail. And I don't know if we got a chance to report it here while I was away, Elisa, but just an example of how this is the movement that we in the CEC associated with Lyndon LaRouche and like-minded people around the world, including some of these regulators you just quoted, that movement for Glass-Steagall is us versus Wall Street in the City of London, was on display in the state of Delaware.
Yeah, we did report that.
Yeah, well, and that's where JP Morgan itself. Now, JP Morgan is probably the most famous and powerful Wall Street bank, but what few people realise, because they don't know history very well, is it's actually a City of London bank. Right, JP Morgan is British. Wall Street is like the British infiltration of the United States. Wall Street runs the United States now the way the City of London runs Britain, right? And the Crown and the City of London coexist in this nexus. The Crown serves at the City of London's pleasure. It's the money power. The money power is above all elected officials, and that's the British system. We're finding out more and more that's the Australian system, and old Labor knew that. Well, in America, there's something slightly different there because they don't have a crown. They have a republic. They've got a constitution. The worst thing about America is they don't follow their constitution. Obama's trying to act like he's a king, right? But a lot of people, because they don't have the denial there that there's an economic crisis, I mean, it is bad. I got to see various manifestations of it, and it's really, really tough. And the congressmen they don't get to deny like Australian MPs do, that everything's in trouble. They know it's in trouble, and they have to weigh that up when they're thinking, how do we respond to it? And some of the best and brightest people in the States are saying, we need this Glass-Steagall, right? Because it's the only way to get economic justice back and a functional economy. You got to put up a divide that is a firewall between the financial services that people use in their daily lives and these Wall Street banks and their derivatives gambling, so that when the next eruption hits, anything can happen to Wall Street, but it will not affect the people.
Exactly.
Right, and that's what congressmen are weighing up, and we might be in a position to win this very soon.
And even in London, the longest-serving British MP has come out just in the last weeks calling for Glass-Steagall, as has the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, which you can read more about at our website. Now, after the break, we're going to look more at the type of fascism that is already in existence to assert this monetary control as the system comes down. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Now, finally today, we'll be discussing what has 5 eyes and 1 head, the British Crown. Now, the subject of this discussion, if you can't figure it out, is the Snowden Revelations, the whistleblower Edward Snowden, who has, as I think everybody would know, made stunning revelations about the extent of American spying on every American citizen. This has certain implications for Australia, which we'll discuss in a moment. But by way of introduction, following the initial revelations of Edward Snowden, in the last period, in the last couple of weeks, there have been further exposés about the nature of the spying that took place by America on Europe. And in fact, the highest level institutions of the European Union, in particular in Germany, you had representatives of the European Union, their offices in Washington being bugged, buildings housing the highest level European Union institutions being bugged. It's come out this week that there was a microphone found in the Ecuador ambassador's office in London. This caused a stunning reaction from officials across Europe who denounced these as Cold War methods, Stasi methods, comparing this to George Orwell, etc. So there was quite a reaction, as you can well imagine from that. Within the United States, it's also emerged that there's a massive facility whereby photographs are taken of the front and the back of every single piece of mail that is sent through the US postal system, which is just extraordinary, so that they can track any kind of correspondence. The other big fiasco in the last week or so was the reaction to the possibility that Edward Snowden may have been smuggled out of Russia on the flight of Bolivian President Evo Morales on his return home, and the fact that 4 countries denied him to fly over their countries or to land in their countries, and of course you can't get back to Bolivia without a stop. He ended up landing after some time negotiating at the airport in Vienna and was stuck there for 14 hours. But again, the reaction across all of South America was rather extraordinary to what was done here. And just to give a couple of examples of that, Morales himself said this is a pretext to threaten, to intimidate, a pretext to silence us in our fight against the economic policies of looting, of domination and intervention. And this is precisely what we've said on this program before, that this spying apparatus is mainly an intimidatory tactic to be able to threaten and blackmail. The president of Ecuador said, look, either we graduate from being colonies or vindicate our independence, sovereignty and dignity. The ambassador of Bolivia to the UN called this an act of aggression. The president of Argentina, President Kirchner, said that this is the vestige of colonialism which we thought we had eclipsed. And the president of Venezuela said this shows the absolute level of insanity and desperation into which the US empire has fallen. So how exactly does Australia fit into this though, Robert?
All right, well here's the kicker, Elisa. Despite everything you've just said, it's not American. It is British. Lock, stock and barrel. When it comes to spying, Britain is the master, America is the apprentice. And what Snowden has just revealed is how much Britain and Australia and Canada and New Zealand combine with America in an alliance called the Five Eyes. And this is an alliance where we help each other compile this spying information on citizens and store it. And the biggest offenders, bigger than the NSA, the National Security Agency in America, is Britain and Australia. There's 4 installations in Australia that do this. Now, viewers have to understand, Americans have to understand this point. Of the 5 countries in that alliance, 4 of them have the Queen as the head of state. One of them is the odd man out, the United States. America has a spying apparatus because Britain demanded it after World War II. Under Churchill's influence, Harry Truman set it up. Britain has a long-standing history of this. Look it up, we'll publish stuff on this.
We've run out of time. Make sure to tune in again next week for the CEC Report.